Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Evening Review. My name is Ogito Greg, I'm your host tonight. And with me in studio is Namibia's Green Hydrogen Commissioner, James Mnyupe. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me, Ogito.
Excellent, excellent. You know, James, this week there was a story in a leading South African publication saying that Namibia is leading the race towards green hydrogen here in Southern Africa.
Sure.
How are we doing? Is that true?
So I'd be cautious about calling it a race and that we're winning. You know, the Olympics, we do that. We compete with other nations. I think in this instance, we would love to be collaborating more than competing. But it is true that Namibia has done well, right, in trying to build industrial clusters that are low carbon in nature, right? Yes. And so green hydrogen per se was never just being made for green hydrogen. It was always a good ingredient to start building industrial clusters that have a low carbon signature.
I see.
And in that instance, what we've been able to do at High Iron is, you know, to be honest, world leading. So it's not so much we're beating South Africa, it is that it's novel enough that no one else is really doing what we're doing today. But of course they will catch up and maybe they'll, you know, surpass us, but it's not really a race. But we should delve into a bit more detail as to what are we actually doing and how does that relate even to our neighbor? Because as you will see, what we're doing in High Iron, in Arandis, we actually need some input from South Africa as well. And it could be that even South Africa buys some of the product.
Before I want you to expand about High Iron and go into a bit of detail about that, let's go back to one of the continuing concerns that all Namibians have, which is how will they participate and benefit. And in terms of that, I see that Hyphen, which is the government's chosen developer for one of our mega green hydrogen projects, has been doing their roadshow promoting local content. Can you tell us a little bit about how that is going?
No, absolutely. And, you know, Hyphen is one of the key players in the industry. And of course, what they're doing is they're saying, look, Namibia, this is going to be a big project. Government has put a high target for us for local content. At the moment, we're saying at least 30% of this project should have local content.
What is local content?
So local content means of your 7 billion euro price tag to build this project, we want at least 30% of that to roughly come from Namibian sources. So whether it's Namibian labor, it's Namibian construction or contractors or SMEs, or even, you know, dealing with government entities, you know, so from MTC to Namport to Transnamib, 30% of that 7 billion must be sourced from Namibia in one way or another. And so that's now a task that they have. Now, the best way to do that is to make sure that from a training and a skills perspective, there's enough labor that'll come through. And from an SME perspective, there is enough contractors that will provide transport, logistics, construction, food, etc., that are aware of what Hyphen may need and that are preparing themselves to provide those goods and services.
I see.
And so that roadshow is to familiarize our local ecosystem to what Hyphen may need so that they can go to the bank, potentially get a loan and start building a business that can supply Hyphen with these goods and services.
So that they can prepare for the blessings that they want.
100% prepare for those blessings. Importantly, I will say, this is not just a Hyphen exercise. So if we look at Daures or even High Iron, they all contracted window construction engineers in terms of Daures. High Iron contracted everyone from Walton, Simet, electricians locally to build those projects. And so as a Namibian government, as a green hydrogen program, we are taking those lessons from the early pilot projects and we're trying to feed them into our economic ecosystem to say, actually Namibians can do these projects. And maybe we could even do more than 30%. And so on the government side, we are trying to do an independent assessment of what should that local content target be for this industry.
Before we go to High Iron, you mentioned Daures. And what I think makes Daures kind of unique is that it's very scientific approach and it's experimental. But tell us more about it. What is a green village in the desert?
Sure. Look, there are really 4 types of projects that we're seeing today. There is a Hyphen, a Zero. Those ones maybe want to make ammonia, potentially to export. Some of them are changing their minds, given, of course, what's going on around the world. There is a High Iron that is making the hydrogen to produce direct reduced iron. There's a CMB that may make the ammonia, but for shipping, and for local transport and logistics. And then there is a Daures that is saying, look, I want to build renewable energy assets and then power an agricultural ecosystem that just uses clean energy. And eventually I also want to use that clean electricity to make green fertilizer.
Okay.
And then use that fertilizer to produce some of the agricultural output that I'm producing. So today, of course, they received some funding from BMBF, the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, and what they've built today is a hectare of probably one of the most sophisticated greenhouses I've seen in Namibia. Mm-hmm. It's automated, lots of artificial intelligence, and that greenhouse is being provided with fertilizer, drip-fed specifically for plants, electricity from solar panels, and then water that's been purified by a localized reverse osmosis plant.
Okay.
And then they're producing, some of the best sort of largest cucumbers we have, green peppers, etc. And they're selling those to the Spars, the Metros, and even the Woolworths of this world, but also to some companies, ships that come and want to buy produce. So it's now a pilot, but it's actually now revenue generating.
Okay.
And the next phase of the pilot, because they've now conquered the renewable electricity, they've conquered agricultural produce, and now they have on site the electrolyzer plant and an ammonia sulfate plant, and now they want to see whether they can start producing green fertilizer. Because today we import all of that ammonia sulfate from South Africa, yes, and they now want to start producing that locally, and they got an additional grant from UNIDO, okay, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, that will now take them through that journey over the next 2 years. And so you can see with Daures, yes, it's agricultural produce, but it's local fertilizer production as well. It's obviously running a green grid. They obviously also have facilities to house people there, yes, and facilities for visitors. So they've got a little lodge, yeah, where tourists can also stay. So quite an interesting exercise.
Very, very. And there's a lot of value in scientific research.
Absolutely.
And for science, you often need grant funding, which is what, correct, has been propelling them up to this stage.
Correct.
But what I wonder about is, as much as what they're doing already is of very huge value and mm-hmm, will continue to be of value, mm-hmm, as they continue, mm-hmm, translating or transferring or transforming yourself, mm-hmm, from a science grant-funded organization to an industrial, profit-driven organization can be a huge change in culture and in how you do things. Mm-hmm. Do you think that transformation, do you think it'll happen?
And so I think it has to happen versus it may or may not. Why do I say that? It's actually not Daures' job to do that. It's the country's effort as a whole. And so government has to be a lot more industrialist in their thinking as much as our private sector has to be much more industrialist in their approach. What do I mean by that? Vision 2030 says by 2030, 42% of our economic output needs to come from the secondary sector, which is largely manufacturing or industry based. Today we're at 15, so we need to increase almost 3 times. Yes. Now that's a target that government set, and our citizens have accepted it because we keep on electing the same government, right? Yes. So we need to build industrial clusters. So that's an agreement between the citizens and the government, 1. 2, in doing so, we have to question what can we do in Namibia profitably and sustainably profitably versus what should we keep on importing. And one of the things government has said is, look, food security is something we should be really investigating deeply, yes, and that we need to try and problem solve. And you can see in the manifesto of the winning party, which was SWAPO, agriculture is a high priority for number one. So in that case, you have to be producing your own food, but you also have to investigate the value chain of doing that. How do you do that in a country that's typically doesn't have a lot of water? So for example, exploring desalination is important. Yes. Exploring cost-effective food production that doesn't just rely on rain is important, and exploring some of the parts like fertilizer is important. So that exercise Daures is busy with isn't just for them as a pilot project, I think it's for the nation. And that's now where nation states show up. So we're studying what Morocco does with OCP, one of the largest fertilizer producers in the world. Zimbabwe is doing the same with Sable. Norway has done the same with Yara. All those big companies weren't just formed out of private sector players that went from R&D to commercial. There was a lot of government backing, and not just with money, but even with policy. And we're seeing that today, even in Europe, Australia, where fertilizer and the UK is an item that's put on something called basically carbon leakage mechanisms, which is a tax that will say, as we're trying to decarbonize fertilizer production in our countries, we will tax fertilizer production that is being made in a carbon intensive manner.
Okay.
So if you're Namibia, is that also a potential policy you should adopt in order to make green fertilizer at home? And if you win, are you producing fertilizer at home just for Daures, just for our green schemes, or even for the region? And those are sort of policy considerations I think as government we have to bear in mind. So it's amazing that we're getting going.
Yeah.
And I don't think with our development partners, the journey ends with a pilot project. We are now beginning to explore commercial potential fertilizer production.
Yeah. Thank you, James. We will be right back after this commercial break so that James can break it down for us and take us even further into what green hydrogen has for Namibia. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Evening Review. My name is Ogito Greg, and we're continuing our conversation with the Green Hydrogen Commissioner, James Mnyupe, who is here in studio with us. James, we were talking about the transition into industrialization, but I want us to look at the high iron development because we are expecting a major milestone just this Friday when they are officially inaugurating their plant. Tell us about high iron, please.
So high iron, like a lot of the other developments in the country, started off as really, let's call it an innovative idea in a lab. And this was 2019, actually, with the sort of key technology maker called Alino. They applied for grant funding for R&D. They got some from Germany. And of all the countries in the world where they wanted to apply this technology, they decided to choose Namibia for very many reasons, including our own government's articulation of welcoming innovative processes that will use hydrogen to create green industrial clusters. And so they partnered up with a Namibian, and lo and behold, I think it was 2022, 2023, their vice chancellor came to Namibia and gave him a 13.7 million euro grant at State House to say, what we've now developed in Germany, we want the first sort of commercial scale to be developed in Namibia. Lo and behold, they started construction in 2024, and today, the finished construction of a facility that has 25 megawatt solar panel farm, taking that electricity to power an electrolyzer that's about 12.5 megawatts. So two 6 megawatt electrolyzers, 43 tons each, they are massive. And then that electrolyzer produces the hydrogen, which then goes into a kiln, call it like an oven, that uses that hydrogen to add value to iron ore. So iron ore is a feedstock, the hydrogen comes in, it reduces the oxygen content of that iron ore, because iron ore is like rust, so it has a lot of oxygen, and to get it to a place where you can use it for steel making, you need to reduce that oxygen content. And then you make a new product, which is called direct reduced iron ore.
Yes.
And that product you could sell to steel mills around the world that will use the DRI to make green steel.
Okay, okay.
Now, when we started with the process, at least when we were monitoring them, we thought, maybe the green steel or the DRI, the direct reduced iron, maybe it goes to Germany.
Yeah.
But then Japan entered the fray and Toyota said, we may want that DRI, maybe to make Toyotas, to make green steel that will be used to make Toyotas. Wow. Okay, so some of it will go to Japan. Then Toyota said, yes, but actually, we may use that DRI in South Africa.
Okay.
And we said, what? Why? And they said, well, in South Africa, we get steel from a company called ArcelorMittal.
Yeah.
And of course, that steel is used to make Toyotas in South Africa, but almost half of our exports go to Europe. And Europe as a market has now decided that they want to be sensitive on the carbon content of their steel. And so using Namibian-made DRI in South Africa to facilitate exports into an EU market that is sensitive on steel is roughly what we're looking at today. And why I was saying before it's not a race, the iron ore that may be fed into high iron may actually come from Kumba in the Northern Cape in South Africa. Now, if you put on your politician's hat for 2 seconds, there's something called the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Yes.
And the idea is we encourage intra-regional trade.
Yes.
So now imagine, Namibia buys a lot of things from South Africa, but we hardly sell them anything. Imagine in this instance us buying iron ore and adding value to that iron ore and selling a product 6 to 8 times the value of what we imported to South Africa, but South Africa then using that product to make even another complex product like a Toyota and selling that to Europe. That is now Africans beginning to play to their relative strengths and increase inter-regional trade to capture global market share of an emerging market that is carbon sensitive on products.
Excellent.
And I think that's why I was trying to discourage this notion of we are racing, we are winning, etc. We're trying to work together strategically with our neighbors to show up as an African continent on the global market, which you now know is full of all sorts of interesting tariffs.
Yes, yes.
So we do need to stick together and work together in a way that makes sense. And this is why I'm saying, of course, journalists are interesting. But
I agree with you, because that's always been our message as a country.
Correct.
We are here to be friends with everybody and to work together towards a mutual benefit. That's even the message that our president told Al Jazeera just the other day. I was so proud of that interview.
Amen.
But coming back to reality, in terms of the process of creating hydrogen for this direct reduced iron, where does the water come from?
So for that particular plant, they've actually, I think, brought on the water either from Swakopmund, or they're also considering boreholes. But that particular project doesn't need a continuous supply of water.
Okay.
So once you introduce the first element of water, you don't actually need to resupply it. Why? So when the iron ore comes, the chemical formula is Fe2O3. So it's iron molecules with oxygen molecules.
Yes.
And then when you introduce the hydrogen in this environment, the hydrogen binds with the oxygen moss. And H2 plus the O produces H2O.
Yes.
And in their facility, they found a way to capture that water vapor that results, condense it, and reintroduce the water back into the electrolyzer.
Okay.
And then use that electrolyzer to produce the hydrogen. So there's like this closed loop of hydrogen binding with oxygen, making water back into the electrolyzer, etc. Super innovative, super practical for an arid nation like, of course, Namibia. And so for them, continuous supply of new water isn't necessary. Over time, there are minimal losses and they'll top that up, but they're really just tanking in water either from Swakopmund. And even if they did apply for a borehole, of course, it would have to get approved by our Ministry of Environment, Tourism, and our Ministry of Agriculture as well.
Yes.
But that, I think, is one of the most innovative things about the high iron project that we should know.
Definitely very innovative. Now, we have debunked the whole notion of competition, but the fact is that high iron was the first one in Namibia to produce our own green hydrogen, isn't it right?
This is true. And, yes, of course, it's important who came first. It's important as well, high iron has reached commercial viability, right? So there's offtake, right? I think that's almost even more important than who produced hydrogen first, because we produce hydrogen in labs all the time.
Yeah, but our own green hydrogen has a big meaning for us as Namibians, especially after last year when we were filling those trucks. To find out that green hydrogen didn't come from us was a bit of a letdown. So now we've made our own.
Now we can celebrate. We've made our own 100%, pretty much almost 99.9% of the people that put together that facility were Namibians. And we're not just producing it for pop tests, because we do that in class. We produce hydrogen with electrolysis today, but small. This one is large scale, it's commercial. As we speak, the green hydrogen program is in touch with them as they ramp up those electrolyzers, because those electrolyzers are big machines. So you don't just switch them on and you have to warm them up and go from 10, 15, 20, 30, 40. They've really sort of gone to 100% on one of the electrolyzers. They're ramping up to the next one. It is a massive, massive feat. And not just for Namibia. To be honest, Agweto, we're getting journalists from around the world, writing to them, writing to the program. I just came from Harvard Business School and Harvard Kennedy School, where I lectured to those students what has happened in Namibia and how that ties in with governmental policy that started in 2021. And of course, they're all massively impressed by what our government has done to get us to where we are. Importantly, though, we know this is phase one. High Iron has an ambition to go to phase two, and that's 10 times the size of phase one.
Okay.
And if they can, they want to start that decision to get to final investment decision this year. So by September, October, November, maybe.
Wow.
And of course, as a government, we have to show up with support. And at the same time, our local financiers also have to start showing up. What I'm seeing that's concerning me is we're getting a lot of interest from foreign banks to fund High Iron, but I have not seen a lot of interest from local banks to fund High Iron, even though at this point in time, the process is fairly easy to understand and there's some commercial offtake. And the concern there is just like, the value, the local content, earning interest on constructing a project like that is part of that value. And if all of that is going to a Japanese bank, it's a pity that we could miss out on our local banks. So I'd encourage our local banks to come on Friday, 2 o'clock in Arandis, see the plant, engage the owners, understand their marketing strategy, and let's get more than just Namibian labor and Namibian sun involved. Let's also get our capital markets involved as well.
Yes, I think that's very important. We've got a lot of money tied up in savings, and savings money doesn't work.
Correct.
It doesn't work, and we need our money to work for us. James, you spoke earlier about the benefit of government policy, the leadership from government, and you've been right there in the wheelhouse. You've been in State House as an economic advisor, but now we're in a new government.
Correct.
And I wonder, do you have some indications? What does the future hold?
Sure. The new government is a government that is born out of the same party that was there in the previous government.
Yes.
So we see a lot of continuity in the thinking of what needs to be done. So for example, mineral beneficiation is a priority in this government as it was a priority in the previous government.
Yes.
What High Iron is busy with is mineral beneficiation.
Yes.
So support there. We see, for example, wanting to be a logistics hub is a priority in this government, and it was a priority in the previous government. And if you're going to do green shipping fuel and attract ships to Namibia, you're creating a logistics hub in Namibia. So again, consistent policy. Of course, there are tweaks in priority sometimes and in personalization. Agriculture is important for this administration. It was for the previous one as well, but maybe it has been elevated.
Yes.
Daures is aligned with that. So I think for us at the Green Hydrogen Program, in terms of, I think we act a bit of as a translator between what does government want to do and how can the private sector get involved. We are seeing some reshuffling in terms of priority, but the messaging is not too dissimilar. And I think that's important for international investors who deployed money with a 15, 20, 30-year outlook 2 years ago.
Yes.
And now they're coming to be told, well, it's not like, in some other countries where there's a totally different president, there's a bit of continuity that provides a bit of comfort. And now for us as a program, we just have momentum. Because of course we were theorizing in the last 3-4 years. We've now built pilot projects, and now we're scaling our efforts to regional and global commercialization of our ideas. And I think that's very exciting. And I think the most important thing, because people were saying to me, you're an economic advisor, why are you only focusing on hydrogen? You can see the mission I was given. The mission wasn't produce hydrogen. The mission was, how do we change how our economy shows up? There's already a lot of focus on the primary sector extractive industries, mining, diamonds, uranium, oil and gas. So you can't just keep on reporting that this is where we're getting our forex reserves and call yourself an economist. The idea was, how do we grow this middle part? And when we studied around the world, we saw that, yes, this clean hydrogen molecule can be an interesting instigator to wake up or to even build a new industrial sector. And now finally, slowly but surely, I think we're beginning to see the bigger picture in Namibia. And that's very, very exciting to be part of that journey.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very hopeful message. But I want to ask you, just imparting my last question to you. Namibians definitely need to get excited and they need to prepare themselves. But most of our countrymen, they are living in abject poverty and really they don't enjoy the fruits of this beautiful, rich country.
Sure.
When will that change? Is our economy ever going to benefit our marginalized, our forgotten members? When will it change on the ground?
So ever is a strong word. If you said ever, I say yes, I think so. The truth is, of course, we're sort of responsible for one part of a much broader economy. And there's also tourism, there's fisheries, there's a whole bunch of other parts of our economy that needs to fire up. I can say that this president is probably more aware than ever of the high unemployment rate, for example, right? She's more aware than ever of the need to, yes, industrialize, value add etc. She's also quite aware of the way to get citizens empowered and involved isn't just through economic means. And that's something I'm appreciating for her more than ever, right? Is she's also looking at the creative industry. She's also looking at other things that are simpler to do that can get our people involved in things like sports. She's saying sports is not just a recreative issue. It can also become a commercial industry. And I think if we get some of our people involved. And so I like the broadening attempt of how to get our citizens involved. And of course, I was given a specific task. And so it'll be very unproductive for me to say, well, I was doing this industrialization thing, let me get involved in producing a movie. That would be stretching, I think, my capabilities a bit. But if I'm creating scholarships that can go and be hired by these projects, I'm doing the little bit I can. And of course, Agweto, you're doing the little bit you can as well. Because by having this program, there's a child out there who today is making a decision in high school. He's saying, should I do chemical engineering, civil engineering, or should I do performing arts? And given the president's message in your program, they're having a better idea of where they should maybe contribute as a citizen. And in fact, maybe to end of the program, we have such a student actually shadowing the program as myself and the rest of my colleagues for the whole week.
Okay.
From high school, 19 years old, this tall, and he's listening to what we're talking about he visited the vice president with us yesterday. Today, he visited the head of strategy at Pupkewitz. He's listening to us and he's making his decision. What course should I study to participate in what part of the economy?
Thank you.
So we're trying to do the very best, and so are you. And thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. And let's take that from what James is saying. Participate, get involved, use your talent, and do what you can. Thank you, and see you tomorrow night for another Evening Review.
Thank you.